Here's another great paper that I want to start off with that Dr. Melillo was talking about recently. And it's called A Model Linking Emotional Dysregulation in Neurodivergent People to the Proprioceptive Impact of Joint Hypermobility. That sounds like a mouthful, but what essentially this is talking about is this. This is the executive summary in that particular paper, which I think is super important to understand. The emotion-perception relationship appears bidirectional. Emotions as different states of action readiness influence posture, such that one can view posture as a channel of emotional communication. Conversely, posture will influence the perceptual process of external information. Moreover, vestibular signals exert a rapid and strong influence on autonomic responses and high rates of anxiety and depression observed in patients with vestibular disorders. So what this is kind of getting at is, especially in people who are neurodivergent, you cannot separate some of the things that are happening with them with some of the things that are actually happening with their brain and spine and nerve system. So if this is one paper that, even though it's not written by chiropractors, kind of shows how important it is for people with neurodivergence, which means people with autism, ADHD, learning disorders, those kind of things, to get adjusted. Because what our adjustments are going to do is we are going to affect all these different things. And there's a great chart in this which talks about how almost everybody that I know that I've ever dealt with who's on the spectrum, let's say, they have significant postural differences. Very often, their postural differences are either, most commonly that I see, is same side high shoulder and hip. Sometimes it's opposite, but a lot of times I'll see same side shoulder and hip, because most of these, especially the kiddos who are more minimally speaking, the more significantly affected kiddos with autism, like autism level 3 kiddos, they're in what we call defensive posture, right? So as if something was attacking them, they'd be in defensive posture. So that's this joint hypermobility kind of thing that we'll see a lot of, is that because they're always like this, now in some areas they're going to have hypomobility because they're so stuck. But in other areas, they're actually going to be hypermobile. So what we'll see is, as an example, I have this one kiddo who's 17, I saw him last night, and when this kid can sit crisscross and bend himself face down to the floor with no issues. So even though there are parts of his spine that are so stuck that they need to be adjusted, but he also has this very, very amazing flexibility that's within his system too in certain areas, right? So certain areas are hypermobile and certain areas are hypomobile, number one. And that hypermobility affects proprioception, right? So proprioception is input. Proprioception is input. Where am I in space? A lot of kiddos, especially the kiddos and the adults who are more severely affected with autism, do not know where they are in space, right? The main reason why a lot of these kiddos have a hard time, let's say if I show them a letterboard and they have a hard time pointing to a letterboard, is because they can't feel their bodies. So if you can't feel your body, you're going to have a hard time doing some motor action based upon that lack of feeling. It's like if you can feel your body, I want you to point to, to this, then I can point to this right now. So there's the word PDF right there. I can point to that. But, is that a touch screen? I had no idea. Wow, okay. So anyway, news for me. So if you can point to something like this, right, I need to know two things. I need to know where I am in space, and I need to know where that is in space. And I have to be able to measure those two different things. But if I can't, where's that great, I have to go backwards now. If I can't measure that, if I can't figure this, if I don't know where I am, then I can't get to this, right? It's like the old adage, you need a map to know, but if you have a map, you still have to know where you are to know where you want to go. Like if I want to drive to Florida, I need to know I'm in Atlanta to figure out how to get to Florida. You can't just drive, I don't know, should I go north, south, east, west? You know where you were, right? How would you get there? So that's number one. And then number two is that proprioceptive thing. And number three is emotional, what does that say here? I can't read about my glasses. Emotional regulation. So a lot of these kiddos who are on the spectrum have a lot of difficulty regulating their emotions. And what this paper is talking about is this is all interconnected. These are not separate things. A long time ago, when I was first studying autism, they were saying that autism is a behavioral issue. No, the behavioral issue is a symptom, right? Their lack of communication is a symptom. Their outbursts are a symptom of what's happening inside. If you cannot, I just want you to think about this. If you were in some situation where you could not feel, sense with all the great senses that we have, therefore, how would you be able to touch something? How would you be able to communicate? If you couldn't smell or taste or see or hear or sense any of these things very well, then that would make you pretty mad, right? If you were put in some dark room, if this room went totally black and you couldn't get out of it, and we didn't have our little iPhones to turn on our lights to get out of this room, you'd be kind of freaking out to try to get out of this room to figure out where it was, right? Especially if you were afraid and it was pitch black and there was no emergency lights and you couldn't get your phone to work, right? You lose all your senses, it would be very hard for you to navigate. Now, you already know this room since you've been in here probably a million times, right? But let's say this was the first thing you've ever been in this room. Imagine the difficulty to get out, right? And so that's that emotional regulation or dysregulation that's going on. And that in turn, bless you, that in turn affects this neurodivergence. And what I think this paper is talking about is the more these things are happening, the more this joint joint hypermobility in combination with hypomobility, which is the subluxation in the small, joints, affects the proprioceptive input in that person's body, affects emotional regulation, right? And I think something that's not mentioned in this, and I wish it was in this, and maybe if I wrote this, I would write it where it says proprioception, is I would write interoception. Because if you can't feel yourself in space, you're probably having a hard time sensing if you can figure out if you have to go to the bathroom or not. You probably have a hard time sensing, am I hot or cold? You probably have a hard time sensing, am I thirsty? You probably also, and what happens is, if you can't sense that I am hungry, let's say as an example, then what happens, what's a common thing when you get over hungry and you don't realize it? You become hangry, right? Well, what happens if you have one of these kiddos or adults who doesn't kind of put this two and two together, right? You and I, we know okay, it's 12:30, 1 o'clock, all right, I better eat lunch, right? Or else I'm going to start having I'm going to be a little nasty to some people, right? So we have to prevent our hangries from happening. But what happens if you can't sense that, right? So if I was to change this, I add the word interoception on top of there where it says proprioception, because I think that's all part of this. It all plays a really big factor. And when you think about this, this is kind of explains how come these kiddos are unable to have some of the normal communication, because they're dealing with all this other stuff happening, right? So that if they have these joint hypermobilities and then these small areas on hypomobilities and proprioceptive and interoceptive issues, this is affecting their emotional regulation. Emotional regulation is going to affect all this other kind of stuff, and now they end up on that left bottom corner there with some level of neurodivergence. But what chiropractic fits in is by adjusting these people, right? We can improve their joints, improve how their joints are working. The hypermobile areas become more normally mobile. The hypomobile subluxated areas become more normalized, which improves their proprioception, which improves their interoception, and then these kids calm down. And that's the whole point of what it is we're doing. Parents are always asking me, what are you going to do for my kiddo who's minimally speaking? Is he going to speak? Is she going to speak? I can't answer that yes or no. That's not my goal. My goal isn't to do something that's out of my scope, right? That's a speech therapist scope. My scope is I'm going to improve their brain and nerve system. And I love this paper because it in some essence, it kind of explains in a sort of a nutshell what it is that we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And I think between like this and like some of the polyvagal, the vagal nerve stuff, I think between, I'm going to like have to take this and put it with some vagal nerve stuff and put it together, and that would really be a good explanation for our patients and stuff. So I want to share this with you. So if you want to read this, this is the name of the paper and the journal that it's in, and it's free. You don't have to pay for it. So this is a great article. Love these papers. So this is the first paper. This is from way back in 2006 from Punjabi, which you've all read Punjabi's work and stuff, right? So a hypothesis of chronic back pain, ligament subfailure, injury lead to muscle control dysfunction. So let's look at this. So this is from that paper. What this talks about is how, if there's intact mechanoreceptors, you'll have a good working neuromuscular control unit which has normal response pattern, and there's no adverse consequences between the feedback and feed-forward mechanisms that are happening here. But now we take this. If you have an injured mechanoreceptor, this is going to create some corrupted signals which will mess with the neuromuscular control unit, which creates a corrupted response pattern, which affects all these different pieces here, creating these adverse consequences, the higher stresses and strains and ligaments and mechanoreceptors and muscles, which creates tissue inflammation. Now this, if Dr. Punjabi was here, I would say to him this. Doc, I love this picture except for this. Because I know it's just related to this paper, right? The injured mechanoreceptors will eventually create chronic back pain. But is that where it stops? So if someone has tissue inflammation, is the only result of tissue inflammation chronic back pain? No. What other possible sequela can come from tissue inflammation? Anything? What can, so this happens here, and you have these consequences. This creates tissue inflammation. So is the only thing that tissue inflammation can cause is chronic back pain? No, it can cause anything. So in my opinion, I think there should be like a zillion branches over here and over here that says this can create all kinds of other issues, whether it's a problem with organs, it's a problem with muscles, it's a problem with emotions, it's a problem with immune system, it's a problem with the GI system. So what this is why chiropractic works. So if you would cross this out, right, and just say tissue inflammation can create any kind of dysfunction, dysregulation, dis-ease, then if we reverse this, what happens? Right? We start adjusting here. So we get rid of the tissue inflammation, we reduce these adverse consequences, we change the corrupted muscle patterns and neuromuscular control units, and now we have intact mechanoreceptors, and now all this inflammation reduces, and hereby this picture here shows why chiropractic works. So when someone asks you, well, I need some science as to why chiropractic works, this is it. This is it. Even if it's just using back pain as an example, but anything that's over here, we reverse this. Adjustments reverse this path and allows body to heal itself naturally. Like, to me, that's a wow. And one of my favorite things that he said in this paper is the injured spine behaves differently, right? Because he taught here injured mechanoreceptors. So what does the word injured mean? What does the word, like, define injury from a chiropractic point of view?
Beyond the cell tissue or organs' ability to adapt.
Yes, excellent. Yes, so beyond the cell or organ or tissue's ability to adapt, right? And in chiropractic, we have three things that we call that. What are those three T's? Toxins, traumas, and thoughts. So what I want you to think about this, when you think about this sentence here, the injured spine behaves differently, it doesn't mean injury as in the car accident, back pain because of a fall or picking up something wrong, neck pain, sports injury. It's not just that. The term injury here, and now I know this is not what he meant, but the term injury here extrapolated actually means the spine that is subjected to some of the 3 T's will behave differently. And this is how it behaves differently, right? So you can, if you have a lot of mental trauma, that will injure the mechanoreceptors too, because like we talked about with the other paper, right? That mental stress is going to create a postural change, which is going to affect the mechanoreceptors, and then you go right through here, right? If you have a chemical change, you're eating stuff that is constantly inflaming your body, that's constantly irritating your body, you're affecting this as well. And obviously, if you have actual trauma, like physical trauma, this will affect it too. So what this really means is the injured spine, any injured spine with any sort of issue. So it's not just crash. Hopefully that wasn't your computer. Or it was? Oh dear. Sorry. That's an injury to that laptop or iPad, right? But that's a traumatic injury, right? But there are other injuries, like someone could have spilled something on it, right? Or someone could have yelled mean things at the computer, and that would be an issue also, right? So a lot of people also think about, like, how do you measure subluxation, or they call it like articular dysfunction in activator? How do you measure that with the leg checks? How does that really work? When you put the hand in the back, lift up your head, all those kind of things, right? So here's one example. They're doing a C5 isolation test where you lift your head up like this, and they put transducers on the legs, and they measured that this is the ones. There's 2 different legs here. One's left side and one's right side. So you can see there's a big difference between the feet in what they're moving, because this is the reaction. This is the reactive leg. So when you have a reactive leg, this is what that reaction actually looks like. So like if I've been doing activator long enough time, when someone has a subluxation, I'll see the leg react in some way. And that's what tells us that that's the area to adjust. And this is a brilliant thing, saying this isn't just some figment of the imagination. There's really something that's happening when someone is doing one of these tests. Another phenomenal paper that really helps prove chiropractic: the effects of manually assisted mechanical force on cutaneous temperature. So forget about these charts. Let's look at this one here. This is one of the coolest charts. So right here, this shows what they did something that's kind of akin to a myovision substation kind of thing when you're looking at temperature of the muscles. So right over here, the adjustment is delivered. Right? The immediate effect of this on the skin is that so here's T0, the adjustment is delivered. The immediate effect is that the temperature goes down in that particular area. Then what happens is over the next 10 minutes they measured, and I want you to look at this. This is the base temperature of the 0 here is the base temperature of the skin. It actually goes above base temperature. After 10 minutes, the temperature in that area that was just adjusted goes above where it was before. So what does that mean?
The specificity.
Well, the specificity for sure, but what does it mean is okay.
Like I'm saying, there's specificity by using specificity, you can affect physiology. Yes.
You can affect physiology, but here's the key, is that people are going to say this to you for the rest of your chiropractic career. Is that it? Is that it? Are you done? Right? Especially if you're a dude like upper cervical, you do a very minimal amount of adjusting. Are you done? Is that all? Here is your answer. Right here, when I first adjusted you, that's when the adjustment begins. It doesn't end when my hand leaves your body or my activator leaves your body. It begins then. Because this is just 10 minutes. Who knows what happens after an hour, 2 hours, 2 days, 10 days, right? So the effects last longer than the actual thrust of the adjustment. So when people ask about, and they trust me, if they haven't asked you already, they're gonna. When they say, "Is that it? Is that what you're gonna do? Is that are we done?" You say, "No, the adjustment's just begun. The adjustment is just starting right now, because now your body's going to take these forces and it's going to use them for however long it's able to use them, and then it'll stop being able to use it, and that's why you need to come back again, because now the spine's in alignment and it's doing some good work, but then it'll kind of go back out of alignment because it's used to that, and then you have to adjust it again to put it back in alignment, and then it's going to go back out of alignment because it's used to that, and you keep on doing this until it starts getting more and more used to it. But this is just a brilliant thing showing that what you're doing is not just working at that 1 second and that's it. It's actually working for longer than that 1 second of a thrust. And this is another paper similar showing that what happens post-adjustment is you light up, your brain lights up. This is fMRI showing that the brain is lighting up after each adjustment in different places. So when you're working on someone, and I say this all the time, every new patient, I tell this to them, I am not a bone doctor or a back doctor. I am a brain and nerve system specialist. And this proves it. This proves it right here. I can show I am working on the brain and nerve system because every time I do an adjustment, I'm not just affecting the skin like this here, right? I'm affecting the brain. I'm helping the brain change. I'm helping the brain adapt. Another interesting paper that we'll talk about momentarily is the proposed model with possible implications of safety. But we'll get back to that in a moment. This is another great paper. This is from Spine magazine in 2013. Tensile failure properties of the perinatal, neonatal, and pediatric cadaveric cervical spine. So what they did, not very fun thinking about it, but what they did is they dissected recently deceased cadavers of unfortunate mamas who passed away during labor and little babies. And what they were trying to measure is what does it take to actually move the spine? The first thing that they found was that the spinal cord without radiographic anomaly was occurring quite commonly. So in other words, there was a lot of injuries that were happening to the spine, the spinal cord, without it being seen on radiographs and without being picked up by modern medicine and their techniques. Right? So this is proving that there's birth trauma, especially in the upper cervical area. And what they figured out is that during their attempts at figuring out what could be the adjustment forces, is they figured out that a traditional adjustment, in other words, a manual adjustment, diversified constant, etc., there's something called tensile strength. Tensile strength is when the body kind of pushes back against your thrust. So you push this way and the body pushes back this way, right? So there's tensile strength. So when you have a traditional, what they're calling manual thrust manipulation, then the body fights back. However, when you use mechanically assisted manipulation, which is in this case like activator, the body does not fight back. So you do not have to go past those tensile strengths. So that tensile force is non-existent with an activator adjustment. And that's why you tell people who say, that's all you're going to do, use that little tapping thing on my back? And they're like, why aren't you just going to crack my back? The reason we're not going to crack your back is because we don't need that amount of force to make the bones move. If we want to make something move with our hands, you fight me, you resist me, I have to go past that to make it work. If we use an activator or another kind of instrument, and you're just lying face down relaxed, there's no fighting. So now we can use a lot less force to make the same result. And this is the paper that proves why. And that's why I'm showing you. These are papers that prove how chiropractic works and why it works, that you can use in your explanations to some of your patients. And this is, I think, one of the last papers. Spinal manipulation reduces pain and hyperalgesia after lumbar intervertebral foramen inflammation in the rat. So they couldn't do this in this country because this was not the nicest thing you could do to a poor rat. And I don't have pictures of it because it's kind of gross. But what they did is they actually surgically opened these live rats, and they put this thing on their little spine, and then they purposely subluxated. them with this like instrument to make it a subluxation, these poor things, right? And then what they did is they used an activator to put it back into alignment. So don't ask me how they did this, but this was just, it was somewhere in Europe that they did this. But here's the cool thing that they found. So what they did is they took pictures of the IVF in the macroscopic version of the IVF and the microscopic version like this. And this is the pre-picture. So before the adjustment, they looked at the IVF, it was nice and pretty, and here are all the cells nice and organized. Then right after they subluxated this thing, this poor rat, they took a picture. Look at how disorganized this is in the macro picture, and then in the micro picture, look at the lysis that occurred and all the issues already happening, like all the craziness that's going on. And then they adjusted it with the activator, and then they took a picture like seconds afterwards, and now look, this is like all within a very short period of time. This picture almost looks like this picture now. It's that quick to back to reorganization, and the cells are already starting to regenerate, or change, or grow, or modify, or morph back into what they were. So what this shows is the cellular changes that happen with an adjustment. But it also shows the cellular changes that happen with the subluxation. Right? So this is a healthy subject. This is subluxation. This is no more subluxation. Right? And I wish they didn't take more pictures, but if they had more pictures, I wish they would have showed it what it looked like a day later, or a couple hours later, because I bet you it would have looked even better than this. But this is the progression, right? So this is where someone is when they're healthy. They have subluxation, whether it's because of some of the injuries, right, we talked about, the 3 T's. So here's some of the 3 T's happening to this poor person or rat or whatever. And then the adjustment helps reorganize that. So what this kind of means is that the adjustment is not only helping on the cellular level, is also helping on the nerve system level, is helping on the brain level, is helping on multiple different levels. This is why, like when someone says, science has not proven that chiropractic has worked. That's not true. There's been a lot of science out there, and this is just activator science, proving how chiropractic works. Now, does it work on everybody? No, nothing works on everybody. That's impossible, right? And that's a ridiculous thing, because if you even think about pharmaceuticals, the drugs don't work on everybody either. Everybody has different responses and stuff. But this is how chiropractic works. Through the adjustment, you take an area that's disorganized and makes it organized. You take an area that was falling apart and shifting it. And if you really want to think about chiropractic in a deep way, what we're doing is we are helping the body change genetic expression. Because if the genetic expression was going in this direction, and we start adjusting that person, and now that person who was over here is now like this, right? That's changing how those genes are expressing. Those genes were expressing this way, now they're expressing this way, right? We're not changing the genes are the genes, but we're changing how they're expressed. Chiropractic is an epigenetic neuroplastic input that changes the environment that these cells are living in, which allows the cells to be better and the nerve system to be better and therefore the person to be better. So I wanted